Ever since she was introduced in the Code arc, Eida's powers have not only shaped the narrative landscape to a significant degree, most notably by being responsible for the village's hatred of Boruto currently, but also remain an unsolved mystery. Despite this ability's ever-present importance over the last 39 chapters, many questions still remain. Why are Sarada and Sumire unaffected by Eida's love charm and memory swap? Is Amado also immune? And why did it take so long for Shikamaru to figure out the truth? Over this 3-video series, I plan to answer each of these questions. Today we'll be focusing on that last one. Why was Shikamaru able to deduce the memory swap caused by Omnipotence just by listening to Amado talk about memory alteration, but unable to figure it out even when Sarada and Sumire spelled it out for him and showed him all the evidence? At first glance, it doesn't make much sense. It's actually really inconsistent. And truth be told, ever since chapters 5, 6, and 7 came out, I've been torn in two directions. Either this theory is true, or Omnipotence makes no sense. However, in light of some subtle cues in chapter 16 of TBV Vortex, I feel extra confident in my answers to those 3 big questions about Omnipotence, which address all those seeming inconsistencies in a narratively satisfying, thematically relevant, and plot foreshadowed way. To briefly summarize this theory as it pertains to Shikamaru, the answer is simply that Eida's memory swap has gotten weaker. What do I mean by that? In other words, the capacity for someone to doubt their memories has increased. But why? Throughout this video, I want you to keep this question in the back of your mind. What does Eida truly desire from Kawaki? Let's start by briefly addressing those seeming inconsistencies. As made abundantly clear in the first several chapters of TBV Vortex, Sarada and Sumire have repeatedly advocated on Boruto's behalf to Shikamaru and the others, going so far as to explain Omnipotence directly. However, despite Shikamaru's confusion about Momoshiki's absence, Kawaki's abilities, and Kawaki's modified body, Shikamaru never believed Sarada and Sumire. Not even once. It didn't matter what they told him and what proof they showed him, because Omnipotence erased any doubts he had about his memories. Not his memories of the physical evidence, but his doubts about his memories. Otherwise, everyone would be surprised every time Kawaki uses Ishiki's powers or his ninja tech. They certainly wouldn't be sending him on missions to specifically shrink Code's claw marks with those powers. Similarly, despite immediately being suspicious of Momoshiki's presence in Boruto, the fact that Boruto had Sasuke's headband, literally hearing Boruto and Eida confirmed that Boruto and Kawaki switched places as a result of Eida's true power, Omnipotence, making Kawaki's desires reality, the same way that Eida unconsciously desired everyone to become her captive and Omnipotence made it reality, and even training Boruto for 2 whole years, Sasuke still didn't fully believe that Boruto was telling the truth. That's the power of Omnipotence that's been described for a while now. This is what made Amado's talk in chapter 5 so shocking to Sarada and Sumire, because nobody else ever believed them even when they spelled it out for them and gave them glaring proof of their case. They were literally sweating just talking about it. What Amado did was not normal to them. If people like Shikamaru had already done this previously when Sarada and Sumire explained it to him, then it wouldn't be so strange for Amado to do it too. They would just think that Amado will soon forget about it like everyone else did. But that's not what happened. The fact that Amado did it at all is what bothered them. This again implies that Shikamaru never believed them. Not even once. And yet, how did Shikamaru figure out that Boruto and Kawaki switched places? He simply heard Amado explain why his memories must have been altered and said, I never considered that my memories could have been altered, but you know what? That makes perfect sense. Now surely you see why that's strange. According to Sarada, she's explained the truth to Shikamaru over and over again and he simply wouldn't believe her. And according to Boruto, Sarada and Sumire went as far as to explain Omnipotence itself to Shikamaru. It would be one thing if he simply forgot his conclusion after listening to Sarada and Sumire, but if that were the case, Sarada and Sumire wouldn't be so shocked by Amado's talk in chapter 5, and they would have been frustrated because Shikamaru keeps forgetting the truth, not because he won't believe them to begin with. However, there lies the problem, so to speak. Unless Sarada just walked into the room and yelled, "Omnipotence, Shikamaru!" and laughed. There's absolutely no way Sarada could have explained omnipotence to Shikamaru without explaining the fact that everyone's memories have been altered, the key to Shikamaru figuring out the truth in the first place. In addition, even if we ignore Sarada and Sumire explaining omnipotence, there are several mind-altering abilities in Naruto, many of which Shikamaru is familiar with. There's Gengo's mind-control voice genjutsu from the Shikamaru Hiden novel, those canon novels that the Boruto manga likes to rely on for additional material, Orochimaru's memory-wiping cup of tea in the Mitsuki one-shot chapter, which has become a focal point for Mitsuki's character in Two Blue Vortex, Sasuke's memory-wiping genjutsu in the Boruto anime, Itachi's mind-control genjutsu on that lady in the Search for Tsunade arc, Obito's mind-control genjutsu on the 4th Mizukage Yagura, any genjutsu for that matter, Orochimaru's memory-wiping jutsu on Anko in a Naruto filler arc, and most notably, Kodowa Matsukami, which rewrites your mind without you even knowing it, the infinite Tsukuyomi, which puts the entire world in an endless dream, and Eida's love charm, which enchants everyone in the world other than Sarada, Sumire, Damon, and the Otsutsuki, the same girl who Sarada and Sumire are claiming altered everyone's memories now. Given how smart Shikamaru is, with his whole motif being that he sees 200 moves ahead of his opponent and considers all possibilities in battle, the known existence of all these mind-altering abilities, the fact that nobody seems to remember all these crazy things like Kawaki's modified body, and these old family photos of Boruto, and the fact that Sarada and Sumire, the two people Shikamaru knows are immune to Eida's love charm, are the only two people claiming that everyone's memories have been altered by Eida, I find it completely absurd that Shikamaru never considered the possibility that his memories may have been altered, unless omnipotence made it physically impossible to do so until recently. Shikamaru is not the only one either. If you recall, in chapter 1 of Two Blue Vortex, after Kawaki told Mitsuki to stop following him around like a sick perv, Mitsuki was visibly shocked by Kawaki's behavior. The use of the word "but" at the beginning of the sentence implies a contradiction, objection, or impossibility between Mitsuki's memories of Kawaki and Kawaki's current behavior, which is further supported by Mitsuki's complete thought after Kawaki leaves. But Kawaki, you're the sun, shining brightly upon my moon. Aren't you, Kawaki? Mitsuki's sun is supposed to be a warm, bright person who helps Mitsuki find his own light from within, not a cold, dark person who shuts down any light that Mitsuki starts to emit. However, we know that this is not the first time that Kawaki has acted this way towards Mitsuki, because Boruto says that Mitsuki realized, quite a while back, that Kawaki's not actually Mitsuki's son, and Mitsuki tells Kawaki in chapter 6 that it's his job to guard him and Eida, and if Kawaki has a problem with that, he can take it up with Shikamaru again. Meaning Kawaki has complained to Shikamaru about this before, and considering Kawaki's personality, he probably complained about Mitsuki at least 100 times. Now let's re-examine that scene with Mitsuki and Kawaki in chapter 6. Kawaki walks outside, calls everyone annoying, and rather than being shocked by Kawaki's cold behavior, Mitsuki instead appears annoyed and simply reiterates that it's his job to watch over and guard Kawaki, Eida, and Damon, and if Kawaki has a problem with that, he can take it up with Shikamaru again. And nowhere does he ask himself, "You're my son, aren't you, Kawaki?" This begs the following question. If Mitsuki was so surprised in chapter 1, why wasn't he surprised in chapter 6, given that Kawaki has acted this way towards Mitsuki multiple times? What makes the 100th Kawaki complaint so different from the 99th complaint? Nothing. All else being equal, Mitsuki should have either remained equally as shocked and confused as before, or come to the same realization sooner, just like Shikamaru. Ikimoto didn't have to depict this scene this way. Mitsuki didn't have to be surprised and confused. He very easily could have had Mitsuki say, "It's my job to guard you and Eida. If you have a problem with it, take it up with Lord 8th again," before Kawaki flew off in chapter 1, and then proceeded to ask himself, "You're the sun, shining brightly upon my moon. Aren't you, Kawaki?" This would have been perfectly fine for that scene, yet Ikimoto chose to have Mitsuki be surprised and confused in chapter 1, but not surprised and confused in chapter 6, And interestingly, Mitsuki's sudden change in behavior occurs in the same chapter that Shikamaru plots to secretly contact Boruto with Ino's help after realizing that Boruto and Kawaki's positions have been switched in everyone's memories. The timing is rather suspicious, and just like Shikamaru, I find it completely absurd for Mitsuki to be so astonished by Kawaki's normal behavior at this point in chapter 1 if he's capable of acknowledging and expecting it in chapter 6. Unless Omnipotence made it physically impossible to do so until recently. But why?
Why?
Why would Omnipotence get weaker? Remember my question from earlier. What does Eida truly desire from Kawaki? Let's dissect this theory more directly. If the strength of this memory swap could in theory get weaker, then it stands to reason that the reverse should also be true, meaning it could also get stronger. But is there any evidence of this? Interestingly, yes. If you recall, when Sasuke saved Boruto in chapter 80, Sasuke described his memory of Kawaki to Boruto as they were running away. Then Boruto asked Sasuke why he's helping him, given that he should think Boruto is Konoha's enemy, and Sasuke says, "That headband, it's the one I gave to Kawaki. Yet you have it for some reason. And that's not all. I know you're there, Momoshiki Otsutsuki. You should be inside Kawaki, so why are you here? Several things are troubling me, but at the same time, I can actively feel in my mind each thing drastically bothering me less and less. It's quite terrifying. I never gave it a thought until now, how completely undependable my own memories might be. I don't know what to believe anymore. And so, I decided that even if I doubt myself, I'd believe in my daughter, Sarada. There are two primary takeaways from this scene. The first is the level in which Sasuke doubts his memories, and the second is how Omnipotence rejects those doubts, making him doubt his memories less and less. That's how Omnipotence has been described to work for a while now. However, what's particularly noteworthy is how strongly Sasuke doubts his memories. He has a firm memory of who Kawaki is, which he describes to Boruto, but he's witnessing blatant contradictions to that memory, and as a result, he doesn't know what to believe anymore. His memories are completely undependable. Sasuke came to rescue Boruto because of Sarada's request, but his dialogue indicates that he did not decide to believe in Boruto until after he saw his headband and sensed Momoshiki's presence, which he presumably noticed right away given that he started rambling about who Kawaki is according to his memories as soon as he saved Boruto, where he then decided to believe in Sarada. In other words, Sarada was a tiebreaker. Sasuke could only confidently make this choice because he doubted his memories enough to go against them per Sarada's request, in addition to his fatherly bond with Sarada and the awakening of her Mangekyo Sharingan. Sasuke's mindset was not, "I don't believe you, Boruto. You killed Naruto. I hate you." It was, "I don't know what to believe anymore. My memories tell me one thing, while my eyes tell me another, so I will instead believe in Sarada's judgment." While Omnipotence was rejecting Sasuke's doubts, it did not do so strongly enough to make him believe in his memories. His doubts remained throughout the entire conversation. However, despite those doubts and literally hearing Boruto and Eida explain the memory swap from Omnipotence, Sasuke never once fully believed in Boruto, even after spending the next 2 years training the kid. He just stopped caring altogether. Similarly, much like Sasuke with Boruto and Momoshiki, according to Sarada, Shikamaru initially hounded Kawaki over his ninja-tech body and the disappearance of Momoshiki, but his doubts were mitigated by Omnipotence over time, to the point that Sarada and Sumire explaining Omnipotence had no effect. Now there's two ways we can interpret this. Either Omnipotence grew stronger over time, leading Shikamaru to stop doubting his memories, or Shikamaru's doubts faded away over time due to the repeated rejection of his doubts thanks to Omnipotence. In other words, Omnipotence didn't reject his doubts more strongly than before, it just said, "No, Shikamaru, don't doubt your memories," so many times that he eventually stopped doubting them. Both are plausible interpretations, but in either case, both Shikamaru and Mitsuki's switch-ups in Chapter 6 should stand out as odd. If Omnipotence grew stronger over time, to the point that Shikamaru completely ignored Sarada and Sumire's explanation and physical evidence, then how could he believe them now? Similarly, if the repeated rejections of his doubts made his doubts fade away over time, then how could Shikamaru's doubts be strengthened all of a sudden when he objectively gained less physical evidence to create these doubts? This sudden change shouldn't be possible unless the strength in which Omnipotence rejects these doubts changed as well. This implies that Eida's powers can fluctuate and adapt over time, and we've seen evidence of this phenomenon before. Look no further than chapter 16. When Sarada and Sumire had their little argument, Sumire acted a bit strangely, lashing out at Sarada with a mix of fair criticism and unreasonable complaints, something Sumire herself questioned after the fact. And while this was happening, Eida's reaction of enjoyment was emphasized pretty heavily. Call it toxic friendship or whatever, that's not really the point. Deep down, Eida enjoyed this. In other words, Eida subconsciously wanted this to happen, and it did. As I explained in my previous video about why Sarada and Sumire are unaffected by Eida's love charm and memory swap, I don't think they're immune to Eida's powers. I think subconsciously, Eida doesn't want them to be affected, because as much as she desires love, she also desires ordinary friends. Friends who aren't captivated by her charm. For this reason, Sarada and Sumire are unaffected by Eida's powers under normal circumstances, but under certain circumstances such as those in chapter 16, Eida's powers will affect them. Similarly, when Eida first came to the Leaf Village in chapter 74, both Shikamaru and Sarada were unaffected by Eida's charm, whereas Chocho and Inojin were affected. However, after Eida specifically called for Sarada and Sumire to come visit her, and Shikamaru showed up anyway, he suddenly became affected by her charm. This leaves us with two possibilities. Either Shikamaru's vision was just too bad to be affected by Eida from a distance, or Eida's subconscious desire for Shikamaru to remain unaffected shifted once she focused her attention on Sarada and Sumire specifically. This implies that Eida came to the village with that internal desire for true friends, which led to Shikamaru and Sarada being unaffected, but once she narrowed her focus onto Sarada and Sumire, those two became her unaffected friends of choice. The second option obviously works in accordance with this theory, while the first option implies a particular condition for Eida's charm to take effect, something along the lines of, anyone who clearly lays eyes on me will fall in love with me, as Shikamaru was unable to clearly see her from a distance. In either case, it's a manifestation of her subconscious desires, which she herself cannot control, demonstrating the adaptive nature of the phenomena we've witnessed from Eida so far. So what is Eida's desire as it pertains to Boruto and Kawaki? Before we go any further, let's address the elephant in the room. This memory swap has been described to be dependent on Kawaki on more than one occasion. First, Momoshiki says that this current phenomenon is Kawaki's desire becoming reality in chapter 79. Then he says that Kawaki went through Eida and invoked Omnipotence to cause Boruto and Kawaki to switch positions on the very next page. Then Boruto tells Eida that this memory swap is reflecting what Kawaki wanted in chapter 80. Then Eida says that it was Kawaki's desire that created their current circumstances in chapter 1 of Tubular Vortex. Then Shikamaru said that Omnipotence's effect lies with Kawaki after getting the rundown from Boruto in chapter 7, and then Shikamaru has a flashback to this exact same conversation in chapter 14. These statements all imply that Eida's desire is irrelevant, and that Kawaki is the sole decider. However, this is blatantly not true, and it makes no sense for several reasons. Aside from the fact that this completely undermines Kawaki's character and doesn't align with any of his words or feelings whatsoever, which I plan to address in a future video, it honestly doesn't even matter as it pertains to this theory. Because even if you want to argue that this memory swap is exactly what Kawaki truly desired from the bottom of his heart, at the end of the day, Eida's desire still matters. Her desire to help Kawaki is still the reason Omnipotence activated in the first place. If Eida's desire didn't matter, and Ikimoto wanted you to know it didn't matter, which would explain why he keeps telling us the importance of Kawaki's desire, he wouldn't have had Eida say in chapter 80 that she just wanted to help Kawaki, and that something similar happened before when she turned everyone into her captive with her charm. Or if he did include that line, he would have had Boruto correct her and explain that it was solely Kawaki's desire that influenced this, and that Eida played no part in it whatsoever. aside from the fact that Kawaki activated Omnipotence through her, since she is the one with the ability. The fact that he included this line, it did so at a time when Eida's ability was explained to activate based on her subconscious desires, clearly indicates that Eida's desire matters, even in the case of the memory swap. And even if you want to argue that's still not true and Kawaki is the only factor that matters whatsoever, Eida is still the wielder of Omnipotence, which activates based on her subconscious desires. So if Eida were to strongly desire to reverse or change this memory swap in any capacity, she could just overwrite whatever Kawaki desired with her own desires. And not just could, but she would, meaning at the end of the day, Eida has the last say. With that in mind, let's now examine Eida's desire as it pertains to Boruto and Kawaki. Between chapters 56 and 79, while Eida has always liked Boruto and has never particularly wanted him dead, she's been more than willing to sacrifice Boruto's life for Kawaki's sake on more than one occasion. First, she struck a deal with Ko to help him regain his full power and sacrifice Boruto to the Ten Tails in exchange for sparing Kawaki's life, which Kawaki called her out for in chapter 76. Then she ultimately pit the Leaf Village against Boruto by switching his and Kawaki's positions. This wasn't done out of spite for Boruto, but rather out of an intense desire to help Kawaki however she could. Eida confirms this herself when talking to Boruto in chapter 80. She just wanted to help Kawaki, and in the process she accidentally swapped everyone's memories of the two brothers, just like the time she accidentally put the whole world under her charm. However, her love and care for Kawaki delves much deeper. She might generally be more on the passive side, but she is not a blind sheep. She doesn't just do whatever Kawaki wants without a care in the world. She has her own perspective on who Kawaki truly is and the Kawaki she loves, and she is willing to stand up for herself and her feelings when necessary, as shown by her repeated threats to Code when she eventually breaks her alliance with Code, and most importantly, when she promises not to look for Boruto no matter what Kawaki or Shikamaru say, and for good reason. Aside from feeling guilty for what she accidentally did to Boruto, Eida doesn't like Kawaki's cowardice. Rather than confidently taking matters into his own hands, he is instead hiding behind the facade of omnipotence like a coward. Eida herself commented on this fact. The Kawaki who lied about Naruto was not the same Kawaki who daringly faced Ishiki Otsutsuki and outwitted him using his own powers that he earned himself. The Kawaki Eida fell in love with. Eida understands that, much like her charm, which merely creates a manufactured romance, a victory artificially created by a memory swap from Omnipotence is not a real victory. It is as fake as her love charm. It's cheap. It's cowardly. Narratively speaking, Kawaki was at his most successful point as a character at the end of the Kawaki arc when he believed in his own power from within after receiving acknowledgement from Naruto. And this was exemplified when Kawaki stood before Ishiki and outsmarted him with a Shadow Clone Jutsu taught to him by Naruto himself. This is also represented symbolically by the fact that this is the one and only fight in the entirety of the Boruto manga where Kawaki doesn't use his ninja tech or otsutsuki powers. He only uses ninjutsu, specifically Fire Style and Shadow Clones. In every other fight and little skirmish, Kawaki uses his ninja tech, Karma Seal, or Ishiki's dojutsu. Every single time, except for this one fight here. The fight where Kawaki proves to Ishiki that he's a ninja, not just a mere vessel for Ishiki. Unsurprisingly, this is also the specific moment that Eida fell in love with Kawaki, when Kawaki had finally acknowledged and appreciated himself as a person rather than a hollow, empty existence, and when Kawaki believed that he could finish off Ishiki, the man who tormented him for so many years and had Naruto helplessly pinned down, using his own powers from within without relying on external sources like the Karma Seal or Amado's ninja tech. That's who Eida fell in love with, the Kawaki who believed in himself. However, this was short-lived. Momoshiki quickly informed Kawaki that he is still in Otsutsuki, and Amado reminded Kawaki that he is still Ishiki's vessel, and that will never change. Meanwhile, Kawaki slowly came to realize his dependency on the Karma Seal, while Amado continued to plant this exact idea into Kawaki's head. Pairing this with the fact that Kawaki began to obsessively attach his self-value to that of Naruto, who recently lost a very significant portion of his power, Kawaki began to lose trust in his own power and began to desire and rely on the powers of the otsutsuki he feared so much, the people who tormented Kawaki all his life, and the people who caused Naruto to lose his power in the first place. From a narrative perspective, this is why Kawaki has and will continue to fail. The ones who acknowledge, appreciate, and believe in themselves narratively succeed, and the ones who don't always fail in the end. As such, Kawaki suffers from tragic irony. In order to protect his ninja master, foster father, and the rest of his family and village, Kawaki has cast aside his identity as a ninja and member of the Uzumaki household. This is made apparent by the way he uses the phrasing, "you shinobi" towards Sarada, and repeatedly tells Himawari not to call him Big Brother, thereby distancing himself from that identity. For this reason, Kawaki is a well-conceived contradiction, just like Jura. Kawaki set forth on a path, yet his humanity conflicts with that path. What he believes he must do is inhumane, yet Kawaki himself is human. Regardless of his actions, Eida wants Kawaki to embrace his humanity and his identity, because Eida wants Kawaki to genuinely be happy and to genuinely feel like he belongs somewhere. Eida might not be able to put all this into words like I did, but subconsciously, I think she's aware of these nuances and can feel the difference between them. So what's the takeaway here? Initially, Eida wanted nothing more than to help Kawaki, especially after hearing his heartfelt breakdown in chapter 79, and as a result, she accidentally swapped everyone's memories with Omnipotence, the ultimate expression of that subconscious desire. However, from Eida's perspective, that very memory swap ultimately led Kawaki to become more of a coward, which she doesn't like. So you tell me, how do you think Eida feels about this memory swap? She's probably not the biggest fan, right? As such, she probably desires this memory swap to a lesser degree than she did during the time skip or when she first cast it, which could explain how and why Omnipotence would get weaker when it comes to this memory swap. But if that's the case, why hasn't it gone away completely? Given Eida's dialogue and actions, it's clear that she doesn't want to inconvenience Boruto in any way, nor does she want any harm to come his way. So why does her memory swap still persist, given that it actively puts Boruto in danger? This is where the complexities of Eida's feelings come to light. Let's start by addressing the obvious. Eida still loves Kawaki. This series has gone out of its way to clearly show that Eida still has an intense love and care for Kawaki as a person, telling Damon not to make fun of Kawaki, asking Delta to watch over Kawaki, and so on. Even if she believes he's being cowardly right now, she still clearly cares about him. Now imagine the hypothetical scenario where Eida undoes this memory swap before Kawaki gets his limiters removed, something Eida most likely didn't know about, just like Amado's shutdown code and reconstructed karma. What would happen? Simple. The whole village would try to assassinate Kawaki again, and Kawaki likely would have died. Sage Mitsuki on his own might be able to take him down, let alone with the whole village backing him up. Without Eida or Damon's intervention, and we all know Damon doesn't care about helping Kawaki, it's all over for him, leaving it up to Eida to save Kawaki all over again, meaning this would be entirely pointless. So now let's consider the hypothetical scenario where this happens after Kawaki's limiters are removed. Kawaki might be able to take on the rest of the village in this case, but he also may see this as a betrayal from Eida, substantially decreasing the odds of her having a romance with Kawaki, and instead increasing the odds of Damon wanting to kill Kawaki for hating Eida or wanting to kill her. No matter what, this does nothing good for Eida's goals, and instead only actively harms them. This also addresses why Omnipotence would have gotten stronger during the time skip, despite Eida's reservations about the whole thing. As I mentioned earlier, Sasuke and Shikamaru initially doubted their memories based on the evidence they witnessed from Boruto and Kawaki respectively, but those doubts faded away over time, to the point that reasoning with it was impossible, at least in Shikamaru's case. Given Eida's distaste towards Kawaki's cowardice only a few minutes after Omnipotence was cast, it wouldn't be too surprising for Eida to subconsciously desire this memory swap less than when she first cast it, allowing Sasuke and Shikamaru to formulate doubts the way they did. However, Eida doesn't want Shikamaru to just figure out the truth willy-nilly for the exact same reason that I explained earlier. She doesn't want the whole village to turn on Kawaki again. It may not have happened overnight, But if Eida was watching Shikamaru hound Kawaki, as Sarada put it, which we all know she did, naturally she's going to get worried, especially if Damon was constantly picking on Kawaki and saying that Shikamaru would eventually figure it out, just like he keeps doing right now in Two Blue Vortex. As such, it would be natural for Eida to at least subconsciously want everyone's doubts to fade away, leading to Omnipotence getting stronger. Then after various interactions between Boruto and Kawaki post-timeskip, her subconscious desire for the memory swap may have weakened again to a point similar to that of Chapter 80, enough for Shikamaru to figure it out, and enough to convince Mitsuki that Boruto is his son, but that's about it. And that's just examining this all from Eida's perspective alone. Boruto doesn't even want Eida to undo this memory swap. He doesn't want to push Kawaki into a corner. He doesn't want to kill Kawaki. He just wants to save his family, friends, and village, which includes Kawaki, and Eida is keenly aware of that fact. To undo this memory swap would not only inconvenience Boruto, it would also completely destroy his goals, and Eida doesn't want that, for her sake, for Kawaki's sake, and for Boruto's sake. Not only would Eida prefer that Boruto stayed alive, Kawaki plans to kill himself after he kills Boruto Code in the Shinju, where Boruto is his final target since they need to work together to defeat the Shinju first, and Eida is well aware of that fact. If Boruto dies, so does Kawaki, meaning no ordinary romance between Eida and Kawaki, which has been Eida's sole motivation this whole time. Furthermore, after hearing Boruto's goal to help Kawaki in Chapter 80, and seeing how Boruto helped Mitsuki appreciate himself and his self-value more in Two Blue Vortex, Eida likely thinks that Boruto can also help Kawaki acknowledge himself and his self-value, something Kawaki has been lacking for quite some time. In other words, Boruto's success equals Kawaki's success, which in turn equals Eida's success, so she has every reason to support Boruto and his goals. As a result, the assistance of people like Shikamaru and Mitsuki is an invaluable asset to Boruto. That's the whole reason he broke out of the interrogation room in Chapter 14, and that's the reason why Shikamaru is following Koji's orders now. Now, am I saying that Eida specifically chose Shikamaru and Mitsuki the way I think she chose Sarada and Sumire as her true friends? Not necessarily. I won't say it's impossible, but it's probably more likely that Eida's weakened desire for the memory swap simply allowed those who were affected to be capable of doubting their memories, where Shikamaru's intelligence and Mitsuki's fixation on the sun are what allowed them to take that next step forward that others haven't. Again, Eida might not be able to consciously put all this into words, but subconsciously, I think all these feelings are there, lingering in the back of her mind. The end result is a cohesive plot thread that ties together statements from Part 1, pushes the plot forward with the changing dynamic between Boruto, Shikamaru, Mitsuki, and Kawaki, is narratively significant for Eida and Kawaki's character arcs, and is thematically relevant with the themes of love and the acknowledgement of oneself. I personally see a lot of potential in this as a story element, assuming any of this is on the right track. If not, then I guess Omnipotence makes no sense in Boruto. But what do you think about this theory? Do you think Eida's powers have fluctuated over time as a result of her changing subconscious desires, leading to the memory swap getting weaker in some instances while getting stronger in others? If so, do you think this addresses those seeming inconsistencies that I described at the beginning of the video, or do you think that Omnipotence just makes no sense? And regardless if this theory is true or not, do you agree or disagree with any of my analysis on Eida's desires and her perspective on Kawaki's character and how it's changed over time? Let me know in the comments below. Watch this video here for more of my content, subscribe and like the video to help me against the YouTube algorithm, and turn on notifications so you don't miss out. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.